not going to do another clap.
Get a little sound.
Okay.
Get a little sound. There we go. Hello, everyone.
Wait, I hit the lights. We want to do it again.
Okay.
Sorry.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Editing the Academy. My name is Darryl. I am your co-host.
My name is Laura. I am your other co-host.
All right. So let's dive into the films released in 1970. As always, the films released 1970, but the Academies were held in 1971.
April of 1971, to be exact.
Alrighty. The 5 films that we're going to be talking about this time are M.A.S.H, Airport, 5 Easy Pieces, Patton, sorry, and, oh my God, what was the other one? What am I missing?
Love Story.
Love Story, yeah, oh my God, Love Story. All right, so this time we're going to change the formatting slightly, and we're just going to have individual discussions on each of the films rather than kind of go through. So, want to start with M.A.S.H?
Let's start with M.A.S.H. That sounds great.
M.A.S.H was directed by Robert Altman, a long career, written by Ring Lardner Jr., based on Richard Hooker's 1968 novel, M.A.S.H, a novel about 3 Army doctors. Stars Donald Sutherland, Tom Skerritt, Elliot Gould, Sally Kellerman, Robert Duvall, Renee Auberjonois, I'm probably mispronouncing that, Gary Berghoff, Roger Bowen, Michael Murphy. And in his film debut, professional football player Fred Williamson. This was nominated for Best Picture, Director, Supporting Actress, Screenplay, Film Editing, and it won for Screenplay. Do you have some fascinating facts?
I have some fascinating facts for you.
Fantastic.
The first one is, it is the first major studio movie to use the word fuck.
Oh.
So that's important. 1970, things are changing.
Okay.
The second one is, there is a scene where Sally Kellerman is in the shower and the tent drops around her.
Yep.
And they were having a hard time getting a genuine reaction from her because she knew it was coming. So the cut that they eventually used, Gary Berghoff and Robert Altman went into the scene but off camera and dropped trow. And she was so surprised and looking at them that she was genuinely surprised when the tent dropped.
All right. We should probably acknowledge with this one, obviously there was the long-standing 13-year series television.
Yes.
And for me, it is difficult to kind of separate the movie from the television show as far as memories and feelings and emotions from it. I did my best. I think I probably failed quite often in this.
I agree. It's very funny because I wrote down in my notes, I struggled to watch this movie on its own terms as a separate piece of art rather than the predecessor to the TV show, but tried very hard to do so.
Yeah, I believe I failed, but all right, so let's dive into the movie itself. To me, I think this was intending to be a comedy.
It was billed as a straight-up comedy.
Okay. I think as a straight-up comedy, it actually failed as a film.
I would agree.
I do think there are very particular moments that are quite funny on their surface, and there are occasionally one-liners that are very, very good that work. The whole committing suicide scene, I thought, on its surface was a very comical kind of scene in the way it was handled. There's a line also where after they discover Major Burns is sleeping with Hot Lips, I forget which one it was, but one of the 2 principals asked, he was trying to understand like the experience of it, and he asked, is she better than self-abuse? I found that quite funny. But unfortunately, those moments were few and far between.
I agree. I think it failed as a comedy. I think that the suicide piece just didn't work for me at all. I didn't find it funny. I didn't find it, not like black humor, dark humor. It just didn't work for me. I thought there was a waste of some talent there. I mean, Robert Duvall is in your movie. Use him well. Yeah. Don't use him as
He was also
Burns.
very early in his career, so.
True, but he's as talented as he was ever going to be. So it didn't really kind of do anything for me. And the characters, the three lead men characters, were all interchangeable as far as I was concerned.
Yeah.
They were all kind of womanizers, funny, great surgeons, all of these things, but they were absolutely interchangeable characters. I couldn't tell you which one was which.
Yeah, and going back and thinking about it, like, it's hard for me to remember and name which one did what particular thing. I struggled with this because, and again, I think it's probably the bias that I had of watching the television show for so many years, where the characters become so indistinguishable from each other, that in this, you are correct, they were just kind of an amalgamation of people. So I just struggled. I didn't find it as funny as it was supposed to be. I don't know. I just struggled with it.
I will just say, because I struggled with all of them as kind of the best picture nominee of the year. And like, this is one of the best pictures of the year. Like, I watched it. I'm glad I can now say I've watched M.A.S.H. the movie, because that's something that, you know, if you've watched M.A.S.H. the TV show, you probably could. But I didn't think, I wrote down, like, what is the point of it? Are we, you know, like, everyone seems to be having a good time, and yet they're in a war situation. Radar and the over-talking of language, that was the only part that I found super funny, was when Radar and Henry Blake were talking at the same time over each other. That was great. Every single one of those. Yeah, exactly. And the radio guy, that was very funny. The loudspeaker, whatever, the language coming over on the loudspeaker, that was funny.
So there are a couple things that I thought were interesting about the film. One of them is it starts with like scrolling text, which I don't know if you've necessarily seen before, so that becomes
good point. Okay.
A character, like an intro into something. I did point out the same thing, that the radio announcements, the loudspeaker announcements, almost become a character in and of themselves.
That was pretty funny.
Yeah, and the intent of there was obviously humor, as well as to kind of push forward some plots. So those were interesting choices, which I did enjoy those as choices. I thought they were executed well, but ultimately I just didn't care. Like you mentioned, I actually wrote down in my notes, like, what's the point of this film? What is the point? Like, yeah. I get that it's, and this is a very common theme in movies, it's a snapshot of a time period.
Sure.
I got that, but ultimately I didn't find it a very interesting snapshot.
No, fully agree. There was no real beginning, middle, and end. They got there, you know, kind of hijinks ensued, and then they left. Yeah. And it wasn't really worth my time.
And as a narrative structure, like, I got what they were doing in the beginning of it, and then suddenly there's a football game, and then it just ends the film. Like,
yes.
I didn't understand why that was. Like, I can, you know, there are many films that will have a quick sports segment in it to help move forward a plot or something, but it was a very long segment. It seemed to have really no relevance to anything, except for they're playing against a rival and they needed to win because they wanted to.
And they had no boundaries whatsoever. They'll drug him, they'll, you know, like, just like they would drug and blackmail the guy in Japan. They had no boundaries.
And, yeah. Ultimately, I just didn't care.
It fell flat for me.
Didn't care.
Yes.
All right. So M.A.S.H. failed. Let's move on to, you want to do, let's see, five easy pieces?
Let's do that.
Okay. Five Easy Pieces was directed by Bob Rafelson, written by Carol Eastman, and Rafelson as well, starring Jack Nicholson, Karen Black, Susan Ansbach, Lois Smith, and Ralph Waite. Nominated for Best Picture, Actor, Supporting Actor, Screenplay, did not win a single thing.
Fun facts.
Oh, yes, sorry.
I have some fun facts. That's okay. It was a Where's Waldo for supporting cast. So you had Papa Walton, Ralph Waite was his brother, played his brother. Sally Struthers in her first role, who is Gloria from All in the Family, was in her first role. Fanny Flagg played his friend's wife, and she is an actress and the novelist of Fried Green Tomatoes and many other novels. And Toni Basil was one of the people that they picked up in the back seat, and she, of course, for 80s Kids is known for Hey Mickey,
Yeah.
as well as a well-known choreographer. And then the other piece I would put in there is that the diner scene where Jack Nicholson wipes all, like gets into
Yeah.
a thing with the waitress and wipes all of the dishes off the table was a real event that Jack Nicholson had done and the screenwriter had seen and wrote it into the movie.
Okay.
So
So they took a little real life and
took a little real life, yeah.
So this film is also, I don't know if it's the first time it's ever done, but this is a very common type of film nowadays and has been for decades, which is basically a character study. We're going to focus on one person, walk them through a series of events so you get to understand this particular person, or at least that's the intent. I will say straight up, I think it failed because what was the intent here? Like, I struggled with this one because they didn't give me enough for Jack Nicholson. Like, we learn later on in the film that he was a piano prodigy and he
Right.
walked away from being that. We don't really know why. We don't have any sort of motivation on his side. We don't really have an explanation. It's just almost tossed away that he was. And yes, there are scenes where he goes and plays the piano. He's asked to play the piano. But it becomes irrelevant information to the overall growth of him and the feeling of the film. If you're going to give me a character study, give me something about that character, give me the details, give me things to latch onto, make them relevant. None of these scenes really seem to be relevant to his character. There's no growth. He's a dick all the way through. Like, there's really nothing that happened. It's just a series of events. And it just failed.
So my comment is, oh my God, I hated this movie. Oh my God, I hated this movie. It was an unlikable protagonist
Yep.
that was surrounded by caricatures instead of people.
Correct.
And the story didn't go anywhere. I feel like a successful movie hopefully has both characters and plot. But you can have a successful movie have one or the other.
Yep.
This had neither. It didn't have characters that I cared about. It didn't have a plot that moved itself forward in any way. The writing was fine. Like, there was a few good conversations that was happening. Like, Catherine, who is his second love interest or maybe his fourth love interest in the movie, because he's got his actual girlfriend who he has impregnated and basically is dragging her along because he doesn't know what to do with her. And then he's having an affair with two other women.
Yep.
And then this other woman that he ends up with says something to him about you can't ask someone to love you when you don't love yourself or anyone or anything. And it's like, that's it in a nutshell. He is just an unlikable person who doesn't like himself, who doesn't like anything around him, who left for we don't know what reason, and I don't care. I didn't like him. I personally don't see the whole Jack Nicholson thing anyway. I thought he had a
We're gonna
great...
fight about that one.
Okay, that's fair. In a couple of movies, I see it, but I don't see it overall. He had a great scene in this. I thought the scene where he was actually talking to his father and showing some emotion, his father who had had a stroke and was not responding back to him, that was a good scene. But that was it. That was the only scene where you ever saw any emotion out of this character at all.
And you don't know why he's going back to hang out with his father, except for the fact that his father is dying. Like, what
Well,
is,
he's not actively dying. He's had a couple of strokes. We don't know that he's dying.
that's true. He's not portrayed as being on his
No.
deathbed. So
No.
there's no real,
He has a caretaker, he's eating, he's dressed, he's being taken care of.
Right.
So,
what was
Yeah.
the point? Why go back? Like, honestly, at the end of it, and I remember watching 5 Easy Pieces. I went through a Jack Nicholson phase when I was
Okay.
like in my late 20s, so I watched everything. And I remember going, this was a good one. I can see where he was becoming Jack, and this was like a good acting at the time. And then watching it again, I was like, no, this is just crap all around. It really is. There's going through even the technical aspects of it, looking at the writing, the scene direction, the actual direction of it, the choices that were being made to put this story forth, none of them really worked. They were all just okay.
I agree. Can we talk about Karen Black for a moment, who played his girlfriend at the time? I think she did the best she could with the material that she was given. I actually give her props for that, and I also want to give props to Lois Smith, who makes everything better. Like, she played Jack Nicholson's sister and brought a little piece of it, but the women were so underwritten and didn't have anything to work with. She loved this guy for we're not sure why. She knew he was cheating on her. She knew that he was did not want to bring him to his family's house. Why was she so hung up on him? I just don't understand.
I honestly think that this is very much a film of its time where...
It's about the man.
Yeah, this was a story supposedly about just one individual, and everybody else is just being shown to have some sort of reaction or development for his character. But even then, it failed. Even if you have, like, a decent film can have one-dimensional characters who are there for one reason alone, to get something out of the main protagonist that you have. But they didn't even fulfill that in this. Like, there was just nothing to really latch onto. Okay, why is she with him? Is it merely because it's the 1970s and she thinks this is the best she's going to get? Mm-hmm. And again, I just didn't care.
No, neither did I.
And I think a lot of that, and this is something we'll keep coming back to, is the being able to look at it from 2024, going back on it. I think we probably would have had a different reaction to it if we had watched it in the theater at the time that it was released.
Well, it sounds like
we saw something different.
And it sounds like you had a different reaction to it in a different time, too. Yeah. So, I mean, yes, times change and you look at different things in different ways. This was a very 70s movie.
Yes.
And I can see that, but I did not respond to it well at all.
No. Unfortunately, most of the films that we're talking about this time were very 1970s movies.
True.
All right, let's move on to Love Story. Unfortunately, I don't have my notes on Love Story, so...
You want me to get started with it and you can jump on in?
I was just going to give, like, who was in it and who did.
Oh, right.
But I don't... Oh, no, wait, there it is. Sorry.
Forgot about that piece.
Okay, Love Story. Written by Eric Segal, who was also the author of the best-selling 1970 novel of the same name, produced by Howard Minsky, directed by Arthur Hiller, starring Ali MacGraw, Ryan O'Neal, John Marley, Ray Milland, Tommy Lee Jones, film debut, and nominated for Best Picture, Director, Actor, Actress, Supporting Actor, Story, and Screenplay, Score, and it won for Score. I've been talking to my parents.
Fascinating facts.
Yep.
Okay, go ahead. Talk about your parents.
I've been talking to my parents about this, and they are both in their 70s, so I've been telling them the films that we've been doing. And when I mentioned this one in particular, they both were like, oh.
Yeah.
And then I just had to ask them the question, when was the last time you saw this? And both of them were like, when it came out. I'm like, you'll have a very different feeling if you go back and watch this movie.
True.
Fascinating facts.
Okay, so fascinating facts. Two of them are, the first one is, there is a sequel to this called Oliver's Story, starring Ryan O'Neal and Candice Bergen, about him dealing with, after the death of being a bachelor, on the, a widower, and falling in love with Candice Bergen. And there was okay, so you said it's based on the book. It's not actually. It is, the screenplay came out first, and then they printed out a book version to promote the movie that was coming out.
Okay.
And so, which did in fact become a bestseller, but it wasn't a book first, which is what I always thought as well.
Okay.
Other choices for Oliver were Christopher Walken, John Voight, Jeff or Beau Bridges, and Michael Douglas. So interesting.
Any of them could have done a better job. I really
Fascinating. All right, this is going to be a good conversation because I may have a different take than you do.
Okay.
So go for it.
So Love Story has always been presented as one of the greatest love stories ever told. It's like the Notebook of its time. Like, people fell in love with this movie. This was just a great love story between two people. And I fucking hated this movie. I hated it so much for multiple reasons. One, Ryan O'Neal is capital A acting throughout this entire thing. Like, he took me out of the movie so quickly and so hard that it was hard for me to get anything back into it.
Was it Ryan O'Neal or was it the character of Oliver, who was a horrible character?
I think it was his acting.
Okay, all right, fair.
There are multiple things. So it was his acting. I had a hard time with his acting, first off. Second, he was angry throughout this entire film.
Yes.
And I just kept asking, why are you so angry? Why? I get, okay, that, you're falling in love with someone who's not of your class, and you're anticipating a fight with your father, which happens a little bit. but not to the degree that his anger is justified for it. In fact, his father does try to reconcile at different points throughout the
Yes.
movie, and he just gets angrier and angrier, and there's no justification for his anger in any way, shape, or form.
The father is not a villain in this story. Yes,
No,
I
but
totally agree.
But he has put him into that
Yes.
category and just as angry. He gets so angry at his father that he gets angry at his wife. Why? There was no rationale or reason for his anger that permeated the entire thing and constantly was taking me out. Like, he did not seem like he was on his wife's side until she got sick. And then he was all about her because now she's dying. Didn't buy any of that up until that moment. Nothing about what he was doing made me feel that he genuinely loved her. I only got the impression that he was doing it just to piss his dad off, which his dad really wasn't that mad about.
He was not a bad guy.
So I was out of this movie from the get-go.
All right, so that's interesting. So you went into it looking at it as a wonderful romance, and
Just trying.
okay, well, that you thought that it might be. I have avoided this movie like the plague since I was born because I thought it was going to be melodramatic schlock, poor man's Romeo and Juliet, which make no mistake, it was.
Sure.
But it was not as bad as I thought it was going to be. I actually enjoyed it more than I thought I was going to.
So you had built it up to something in your
Yes.
head before you even saw it.
Absolutely. I thought it was going to be horrible, and then when I saw it, I was like, it's not good, but it's not terrible. So first, one of the reasons is of all of the 5 movies that we watched for this podcast, this is the only female character that even approached being a well-rounded
Yeah.
female.
And she was
So
awesome. She did a great
Yes,
job. I would
yes.
give her tons of credit.
she did a really good job. She was not a perfect person. She was a well-rounded person. She was a little too perfect. She was smart and sexy and all of the, like sassy and all of these wonderful things, but she was also nervous at times,
Yep.
and she, all of those things. So I really liked her, and maybe it's just because in watching those 5 movies, she was the only woman that was even close to a real life person. I also loved Phil. I loved her father. I thought he was a great character.
Yeah.
He was portrayed well, and the romance of them was longer than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be truly a Romeo and Juliet. They meet, they fall in love, she dies. How sad. And it was, at least 3 or 4 or 5 years that they were together, and so it was more of a true relationship than I thought it was going to be. But I do think my reaction comes from I expected to hate it, and I really didn't.
So I do appreciate that about the film, that from the get-go, she was her own person, she did not compromise. She eventually fell in love with this particular person, but it was not immediate. She was against him from the beginning.
Yes.
He had to put in a lot of energy and time to actually win her over. And then once he did, she was all in. And
Yes.
that's great. That's what love
Yeah.
should be. Like, if I love you, then I'm all in.
Yeah.
So I appreciated that, and that her character did not change. Like, she's constantly calling him Preppy throughout, even up to her deathbed. Their relationship that was established on her side did not change.
Yes.
His, it absolutely went up and down and all over.
Yeah.
But from her side, it did not. And I thought that was the only thing the film did well, was the handling of her character and her being in love with this particular person. She was the only thing that made this movie tolerable for me.
And the other thing about this is it had a beginning, middle, and end. It had an actual story arc. So Ryan O'Neal, I found Oliver intolerable. I agree. I think he was mean to his wife. He was, he didn't give his father the time of day. His father was not the villain in this movie. Also, like, poor guy driving around that car that he drove around all the time. Like, okay, sell the car and I might actually feel bad for you, but you're still driving the car, going to law school. You're fine, my friend.
Yeah.
So I didn't like that, but I did find Ryan O'Neal charming. I really did. Yeah, I hate to admit it, but he was charming, even though the character I hated.
Okay. And I understand the difference between the two.
Yes, and then just one more thing is the writing piece of it. So they goddamn used the word goddamn too much. It really it was a tick and it bugged me.
Yep.
And love means never having to say you're sorry is stupid. I'm sorry. Yeah, I know that's the tagline, and I understand what it means means, but I just thought it was kind of trite.
I was surprised that this is where that came from, because I've heard that, over and over
Yes.
again throughout my entire life, and okay, finally now I know where it comes from. Great,
Right.
now, but I don't care.
Yeah.
Minor nitpicks for me,
Sure.
actually not minor, major nitpicks. The theme
Yeah.
plays over and over
Constant.
and over, and a lot of times in moments where it's absolutely not necessary, it's just, I think it was trying to pull at the heartstrings, and it just was overdone. Like,
Yes.
a good theme should weave itself in, come to the forefront every once in a while,
Pull back. Sure.
and it was just constantly in your face. This is the theme of our movie. Here's the thing. Here it is again, everybody. This is an important moment. Pay attention, because we're playing the theme. Like, no, man.
Fully agree with that.
Doing it.
Yes.
Anyway, fucking hated this movie.
All right. I did not. I liked it. I think this is our first major disagreement.
Good. I'm glad we have one. Anything finally you wanted to say about that?
No, just that it wasn't as bad. Again, when I say I didn't hate it, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. None of these movies did I love. Let's just say that. Go ahead.
Okay, now let's move on to what I hope will probably be the most interesting conversation. I want to move on to Airport.
Okay.
I'll give the facts, and then I have a couple things that I'm going to say right out of the gate before you even get to speak.
Okay.
So I'm going to do that.
Okay, before the fascinating facts.
Yes.
Go for it.
No, I will let you do the fascinating.
Okay.
Airport, written and directed by George Seaton, starring Burt Lancaster, Dean Martin, based on Arthur Haley's 1968 novel of the same name. Supporting cast was Gene Seberg, Jacqueline Bisset, George Kennedy, Helen Hayes, Van Heflin, bunch of other people. I'm not going to, because there's tons of them.
Everybody was in this movie.
It was nominated for Picture, Supporting Actress, both Hayes and Stapleton, Screenplay, Art Direction, Cinematography, Costume Design, Editing, and it won for Sound, Actress, Supporting Actress. Helen Hayes won it. This was also the start of what is now a staple in the movie industry, the disaster movie.
Yes.
Fascinating fact.
Okay, so I've just got two, one of which is, so as you mentioned, Helen Hayes won Best Supporting Actress. She became the first person to have won a Best Actress award in 1938, and now Best Supporting Actress in this year. And the other one was that it was filmed mostly at the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport because they knew that there was going to be a heavy snow, and that year there was no snow. They had to have plastic snow, so.
It's kind of like when The Preacher's Wife was filmed here in Portland, and it was supposed to be
Exactly what I was thinking.
like super warm.
Yep, there was no snow for them. They were very sad.
Okay, this is what I want to say about this movie. This was the most intriguing out of all of these movies for me. First off, I always have confused airport with airplane.
Very different movies.
Absolutely, 100% very different movies.
Yes.
But in my head, I've always
Okay.
confused that. So anytime somebody said airport, I just instantly think of
Airplane.
Airplane.
Sure.
This movie tackled so much. I mean, there was so many different themes running through. There were so many things that this was taking on. And I don't think it did a fantastic job with any of them, but I gotta give the film props for its effort. There's so much in this movie. I was shocked at how much there is in this.
I'm going to jump in just to say that in my notes I wrote, this is Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. That's what this is, yeah.
There was so much that they were taking on. I mean, it is not just a simple story of an airport and something happening wrong with a plane. There are so many through lines. They tackle divorce, infidelity, mental stress, because we have the bomber on the plane, which that's just a weird thing in and of itself. They tackled so much in this movie, and the entire time that I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, and yet here's another thing they're throwing in. And they didn't mishandle, I don't think, any of it, but they didn't handle any of it incredibly well. I thought it was all average.
The plane didn't even take off until hour 2. There was a full hour in the movie before the plane even took off.
And when I started to watch it, I was like, oh, okay, so this is going to be just a drama about what it's like to run an airport, and we're going to have some little sidelines of infidelity and things like that. Okay. Fine, I'm on board with that. Oh, no, it's not even about that. That's just a portion. Now we're going to deal with the politics of what it is like to be an airport in a neighborhood. Now we're going to deal with the politics of what it is like to have male and female relationships
Yes.
and power struggles. Like, it really
Stowaways, don't forget the stowaways. Yeah.
It tried so hard to take on so much, and I was 100% on board for all of that. I was super happy after I watched this movie, not because the movie was great, it's not, but its effort, it swung really hard and high for the fences. And for a movie about an airport, I'll give it props, man. I really will. I thought it was awesome, the effort that they put into this movie.
I completely agree with that. I think that in 1970, this was not seen before. This was new for its time. It had a lot of, as you said, dramatic issues, but then it also had the disaster piece of it. But I did think, like, 10 years later down the road, this would have been an NBC movie of the week.
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah, it felt like there were two different movies actually going on. One was the running of the airport, and one was the disaster airplane movie that they kind of tacked on together. So I agree, they worked hard at this movie. I have a lot of nitpicks to it.
Oh, no.
But I agree that it
deserves to be picked apart.
It deserves to be picked apart, but it also deserves the props of they did a lot of things and a lot of things well with a very large cast. And I did not feel the timing of it. We'll talk later about another very long movie. I was engaged throughout the movie.
Yeah.
Whether I thought it was good or bad, I kept watching it.
Yep.
I did not think it was too long, as some of these movies have been too long.
I agree with you. I think the pacing of it was right.
Yes.
It did not linger too long on anything. So
It hopped around nicely.
Yeah, it did not feel like it was a 2.5-hour movie. And again, all the little things that they did, the direction of it was fine. The editing of it was great because they kept weaving in things at just the right moments. Like, you'd spend enough time with one thing and then they would move on to the next thing. So the pacing of it, I thought, was fantastic.
Yep.
The execution of a lot of those things, and again, I honestly believe this is just me in 2024 looking back on it, the execution of it did not really live up to my expectations of what I think it could have been. Because you're right, at certain moments it did feel kind of like an NBC movie of the week.
Yes.
But its effort and what it tried to do, I just got to give it props for.
Well, and in 1970, it started the disaster, as you were saying, it started the disaster craze that is still going on today.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it deserves the props that we're giving it, even though looking back in the 2024 lens, and even looking at it then, there were some hugely problematic parts.
And
would you like me to dig into some of the hugely Okay, the first one I have is the music. It was wildly off-putting to me. So every scene, as you said, it addressed, like, okay, so there is, Dean Martin is now going with the stewardess, and so there's some romantic slow jazz that's going to play. And then you have Helen Hayes, and it's like the bebop, hey, just to let you know, everyone, this is the comic relief. And then it would go to the bomber and some thrilling music, and it was off-putting, and it just it came into the story too much. As you were talking about the other one, where it just was like in there and it didn't back off, it was just, hey, this is the thriller part, pay attention. I didn't care for that.
Addressing that, I think throughout the 1970s, we see the music and music scores really try to kind of figure themselves out as to how they should be in movies. Mm-hmm. Previous to this, music scores were loud, they were in your face, they were very directive of, like, now you feel happy, now you feel sad.
It was trying to direct my emotions.
Correct.
Yes.
And in the 1970s, I think, is when people really started to kind of figure out what a score can do and how it can enhance a film, as opposed to just be so blatant as it always was before. So I'm with you in that. I completely agree.
I do think that, again, this was a movie where kind of some of the parts were really good. I'm going to actually go back and say some positive things, because I missed a couple of positive things. Okay. Burt Lancaster understood the assignment. He was a romantic lead. He was fully in control of the airport. He had a twinkle in his eye when he was talking to Helen Hayes. Like, I don't think, I read something later that he did not enjoy this movie, that he didn't like making it, but he did a good job. He was doing what he was supposed to do. Juxtapose that to Dean Martin, I actually am a huge Dean Martin fan. He was terrible in this movie. He did, every once in a while, he gave a great line read, and that was pretty much all I could say for it.
Do you know if this was his first actual movie role?
I don't think so, because he was in a famous Western with John Wayne that the name escapes me right now, that I think that was before this. So, and he was wonderful in it.
Relatively new to it?
To dramatic roles, probably.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he'd been in comedies forever.
Right.
Yeah, but I don't know, but he was kind of terrible. And Helen Hayes was a straight up delight. I thought she was wonderful. You know, what she was doing, unfortunately, didn't totally match the rest of the movie.
No.
I mean, it was like something else, and then they come to Helen Hayes just for a little comic relief because it's getting too dark.
That's interesting that you mentioned that, because when they would focus on certain characters, it was almost like it was a different movie.
Yes.
So there were a lot of, this movie was a lot of movies, not one cohesive movie all the way through.
That's a great point.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And until you actually mentioned that, that had not been put into my brain, but you're absolutely correct. This is a lot of individual movies, and each movie focuses, like each character has their own movie and style. Okay. Yeah,
But I did like how the filming outside and the filming inside, I wonder if other movies had done that beforehand, because it could have been a claustrophobic airplane movie, and it wasn't.
Right.
You know, I thought that it was well shot.
minimal.
It is, but it's also well shot, you know, and then the time outside, they're out, they're on the field, they're in the airport, and it feels like a very big movie, and then it becomes an intimate movie as well. One of the notes I have to say is, I personally felt assaulted by the way George Kennedy was like making out with his wife. It was creepy and wrong, and I urge you to go back and look at it. It's just not right. So his whole character, again, was not part of this movie. I don't know. He was actually, should have been in Patton. He was in an entirely, as Burt Lancaster understood the assignment, George Kennedy did not. So that's my thought. And then just, I think that's pretty much my last comment is just the writing, I think, was not necessarily meaningful. It was fine. It moved the plot along. But it was one that I enjoyed watching, and I never got bored. There's always something going on, but it was a bit of a hot mess.
You know, it's absolutely a hot mess. But again, I think the reaction that I had to it was merely because I had an expectation of what this was going to be. I thought it was going to be just a piss poor movie about an airport and some sort of disaster. And as I was watching it, seeing it attempt to tackle all of these individual things, I kept rooting for it. Like, I want you to be so much better than you are. I really, really do.
You had my love story reaction.
Yeah.
You had my, I expect this to be bad, and it's fine.
Yeah.
And that was absolutely the reaction that I had.
All right. Patton. The winner for the year was Patton. Stars George C. Scott, Carl Malden, directed by Franklin Schaffner, script by Francis Ford Coppola.
I did not know that.
Edmund North as well. They based their screenplay on Patton, Ordeal and Triumph by Ladislas Farago, and Bradley's memoir, who was a general soldier story, was nominated for Best Picture, Actor, Screenplay, Direction, Art Direction, Cinematography, Editing, Original Score, Sound, Visual Effects. It won for Picture, Director, Actor, Screenplay, Art Direction, Editing, and Sound. Basically, it took everything.
It was a Patton year at the movies.
Yes.
There was also a sequel to this movie that was a TV movie, also starring George C. Scott. So it was The Last Days of Patton in 1986.
Wow.
It was not up for very many Emmys, so I'm just going to leave that at that. And apparently Hollywood had been trying to make a Patton movie for years, like since he died in the 40s, and his widow refused. So the day after his funeral, they called their children, and the children also refused. So they eventually ended up calling General Bradley, played by Carl Malden in the movie, who became a consultant on the movie. So if it seems like Bradley seems to be a very positive influence in this movie, there may be a reason for that.
Sure. Okay, so this one won for Best Picture. I thought this movie was fine. I thought this movie was definitely of its time. It is a very early 1970s movie. It has that look, it has that feel. One of the things, and every time I watch any sort of historical movie, I wonder what the accuracy is of things. So I was actually looking up a lot of the things, like, was Patton actually, shot at by airplanes, those kind of things. And one of the things that they did while filming it is they did try to make it as historically accurate as possible. They did take some lenient scenes, they did kind of push some things together, and there are certain scenes that never happened, like the scene with the English Brigadier General when they actually meet, they actually never met.
Oh, interesting, okay.
But they did have a relationship that was not so cordial, apparently. The opening speech, which I thought was a great way to open this film. Like, it set the tone right away, and I thought that was a fantastic way to open this kind of movie. That speech, while not 100% note for note accurate, is a speech that is mostly accurate that he gave all the time.
Interesting.
Like, when he would address troops, this is the speech that he would give. They took a little bit of license, changed some things around, but that's pretty much the speech that he gave to the troops. I was like, okay, it's nice to know that at least they're drawing on correct historical references, that these things did happen. It's not just some sort of glorification. It's not an Oliver Stone history movie.
Right.
There is fact here. Having said all of that, boring. It was just boring.
But it makes sense that it was, in 1970, a Best Picture nominee and a Best Picture winner. I mean, it is Oscar bait if ever there was one.
It does.
Yeah.
It ticked all of the boxes. There, in comparison to a lot of the other films, the things that it was nominated for were one or two in the listing of things. Like, everything was at its peak in comparison to the other things that were nominated. It did better, or almost better, than most of the other films that were actually put out that particular year. So it was fine, but it was fine in a sea of bleh.
In a sea of fine.
Yeah.
So this is a movie that was always going to live or die by the performance of Patton, because it was all about Patton, and I thought George C. Scott did a really magnificent job in this. And same thing, I think the same thing is, it was a good mix of, it was a big war movie, and then, there was action and explosives, and then there were some smaller moments that showed you who he was, and then starting with the flag, I thought was fantastic, that speech, and then ending with him kind of tilting at windmills, so to speak, I thought it was a little on the nose, but it was very, very good.
That is one thing that they did change for the film itself, because Patton actually ended up, like, accident at the end of the film. He actually died in that accident.
Oh, okay, yeah. I didn't realize that.
They changed it so he walked away because they couldn't have their, main character just die in a car.
Not in a 1970 movie, they couldn't, yeah, exactly.
So they did change that aspect of it.
Yeah.
This was, in a lot of ways, and this is going to be true for a lot of the movies in the 1970s, it was filmed very much like a play a lot of times. You have framing, you have a very specific thing. We're going to just have you walk from here to here. It had a very play-like attitude.
Agreed.
A lot of the scenes, not the action sequences and things, which those, for the time, were really big budget kind of things that were happening.
Absolutely.
But it really did have a very play-like atmosphere and attitude during some of the filming.
Yep, I agree. I think one thing I do want to put out there is May is Mental Health Awareness Month. This is not a positive depiction of how one should deal with mental health awareness, especially around our veterans. So I'm just going to put a plug for, he was not a good man when it came to the health, both mental and physical, of his soldiers. Yeah, exactly. But then again, he got crap for it, so that's a good thing.
Actually, another historical thing that I sent you that link, but I read all the way through, according to that particular article, he did slap multiple soldiers. He never apologized, like he did in the movie. He never apologized.
I'm not surprised to hear that. I felt like this movie was a little apologetic for him. I felt like this was Patton in a very positive light, although, he had a couple foibles, but it was generally General Patton was it was very positive in as far as he goes. It was interesting, though, because looking at it through the 2024 lens, it really did predict that place we're in now, where a moment goes viral. It maybe is not something that you said, or maybe you just agreed with somebody who said something else, or maybe somebody's interested in a soundbite, and they ignore everything else you say, and you got caught for that thing you said. And I just thought that was interesting, because that wasn't necessarily a thing in 1970s and during World War II, and apparently it was, or at least I didn't think it was a thing.
There are certain moments, and I know they were intentional by the director, where you have Patton framed and shot almost godlike. Like he's solo, there's upward angles to him, like he's not shot necessarily straight on. There were some interesting, I thought, directorial choices. There's a scene when I think it's in Sicily, where he comes out of his hotel that he's staying at, and they go down the stairs, and the camera starts on him and then follows him down the stairs, then he disappears, and then it slowly comes down so it's on the ground floor.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
There are a lot of little interesting choices like that the director was doing to make it quote-unquote artistic, that I did think seemed to enhance kind of a lot of the mood of it. So the director was taking some chances, some risks, and I think those chances and risks actually ended up paying off for the overall quality of the movie. And again, it was all just to try to help frame him in a very particular light. I think he's in it 90-95% of the time.
Oh, yeah.
There's very few scenes where he's out of it. So it is 100% all about him and the portrayal of him. And I think they did a really good job of showing what they wanted to show and giving the direction that they wanted. As an audience member, they wanted us to see him in a certain light, and I think they did exactly what they wanted.
I agree with that. I think that it was a high-quality film for its time.
Yep.
I think it accomplished everything that they wanted to accomplish. It was a decent script. It was a decent story. It was a really top-notch performance. I think it was too long by a lot.
Yep.
It seemed to be very repetitive of battle after battle. Yes, I understand who he is, and so, but yes, I agree with you. It was fine. It was just fine. And I must say, it's one of these that I'm like, okay, I've ticked the list of I wanted to see Patton at some point in my life. Done it.
Now I'm done.
Yep, exactly.
All right, I have nothing more to say about any of these, so I'm going to ask you the question. Patton was the one that won for the year. Did the Academy make the right choice?
Looking at the 5 movies, my answer is sure.
Yeah. That is and I'm not even kidding, that is my exact same answer. I was like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Honestly, I could flip a coin between this and Airport, and I'd be fine either way, only because Airport tried to tackle so much. But honestly, sure, Patton.
Okay, yeah,
5.
Out of these 5.
Yeah.
So what is your list in order of the ones that you liked?
I know we would normally do this, and we're going to keep this as a segment. I don't.
We can't do it.
I don't care. I really don't. It was such a bad year for movies that I really don't care.
I had Patton, and then I had 5 Easy Pieces as my last, and the other 3 really doesn't matter where. I kept shifting where they landed. Honestly, I had Love Story at second until we've had this conversation, and I'm like, yeah, I really should give the props to Airport. So, but I don't care either.
I don't care.
They were of these 5 movies. So I will tell you, in preparation for this podcast, I went out and I was going to prove to you that, look at all of the movies they overlooked just to come up with these 5. That's not what happened. These were the cream of the crop.
So
Did you do the same thing?
No, I almost did, and I was like, I have a feeling that it's just going to be a waste of my time, so I'm glad you did.
I wasted my time for you to do this, and they all sucked.
And these were the best films.
These were the best films. I would say maybe I had heard of Another 5, and I'm pretty up on movies.
Yeah.
I had heard of Another 5, and none of them did I have any desire to watch.
All right. So, there you go. 1970, a bad year for movies. Let us know what you think. Hopefully somebody out there really loved one of these films and would like to
love to hear that.
why you feel that way. I would love to hear that. I'm sure you would as well.
Absolutely.
Other than that, no, it was just a bad year.
But next year looks better. I'm looking forward to the next one because there's a couple in there that I'm looking forward to rewatching.
Have you seen all of them?
I haven't seen all of them yet, but I have seen a couple and I want to rewatch them in 2 days lens.
Got it. All right. So until next time, thank you all very much. Like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff. And
Thanks.
see you.
Yeah. Bye.